Alright folks, here we go, and in this tutorial here for our Intro to SolidWorks tutorial series, we're going to be talking about how to make patterns in SolidWorks, talking about how to make patterns of our features and how to pattern different features that we've applied to our parts. So I'm going to go here and make a new document, and you can see that I'm going to use the Axis 1 template, the template that we made in our previous tutorial, which was tutorial number 8. We are here in our advanced new document dialog box, and we can see our templates there. I'll hit OK. And once we fire up this new doc, I can see that I've got all three of those axes that we made ready to go. Now those are going to help a lot in defining the direction of the patterns that we're going to make, and you'll see why in a little while. So let's get into it. The first tutorial that I have for patterns is similar to the stock one that comes with SolidWorks. It's a little bit dry and a little bit slow, but it does tell the story of how to use the pattern tool well. And patterns can be tricky. I'm going to get right into it here and show you guys how we do this. I go to the front plane and create a new sketch, and I'm just going to draw out a big rectangle to start, about like that. I'll exit out of that sketch, and I will apply a extruded boss base to that, and I'm going to pull out a little extrusion to just create kind of a plate that we can then cut into. So I'm going to make an extruded cut next. So I'll draw out a sketch, I'll apply the extruded cut tool, and we're just going to cut a shape out of this wall here, and then we're going to pattern that cut across the entire plate. So let's go ahead and do that. First thing I have to do is take a look and try to remember which plane did I draw this off of. It was the front plane. So I want to draw a sketch that's going to punch a hole right through this plate, front to back, just like that. So I'll probably draw my sketch on the front plane again. So right click on that front plane, and I'm going to create a new sketch on the front plane. I can see up here in the right hand corner that I am now inside of an active sketch because I have my exit sketch buttons there showing me that, but I'm not looking normal to the plane, so it's going to be tricky. So I'm just going to hit Control 8 to look normal to, and then I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a slot. Now in our previous classes we started to get into some of these sketch tools. I think we went over the line tool and maybe the circle tool, and I'm leaving it a little bit up to you guys to explore some of the other tools that are in here. The slot tool is a fun one. I'll show you guys how this one works. You just draw out the center line of the slot, click once, and then drag to define the width of the slot. And then I'll just hit escape to drop that tool. And I'll just zoom in on it here, excuse me, to show you guys what a slot is. It's a, sort of like a pill shape, right? Like a rectangle with two circles on the end. And the slot tool comes stock with a couple of dimensions on it, and you can click on those and adjust them if you want, but I'm going to just stick with what we've got here. And so now I'm just going to zoom out again, and I'll hit exit sketch, and I'll just take a spin around my part here. Now I want to apply an extruded cut to that slot, so I'll just hit extruded cut. And you can see that SolidWorks is, as usual, keeping right up with what I want to do, recognizing that I just made a sketch, and so it's applied this feature to the sketch automatically. I don't even need to go and click on that. But we can also see, if we zoom in here, that it's fired the extrusion off in the wrong direction. So I have to flip that. So I'm going to go here to the property manager. Under direction 1, there's this button here, these two little arrows pointing opposite directions. That's reverse direction. And I'll just reverse that direction. I'll take a spin around my model and try to see, has it gone all the way through? There we go. Alright, now this is an extruded cut here, so I'm not actually going to make this shape, but I'm going to cut a hole out of our plate here that is in the shape of this form. So I'll go ahead and hit the green checkbox to confirm, and there we go. I've got a nice little slot cut out of there. Okay, good. So I'm just going to do a right click and drag up to the right, and I'll go back to my standard perspective view. In fact, maybe I want to look at this straight on, and one way to do that, there's a bunch of different ways, as we know, to look and orient ourselves, but I can just click right on this face with a right click, and there's my normal to button. So I can just go normal to that face very easily by just going normal to. Okay, so here is our slot that we've drawn, and what we want to do now is create a linear pattern. We want to multiply this cut all the way across this plate here. And so this is how we're going to do that. I'm going to grab my linear pattern tool. It's underneath the features tab of the command manager. So I'll click on that. Let's see, excuse me, linear pattern, perfect. And Solidworks, because I've chosen a feature, it's going to bring us to the property manager of that feature, and it's going to ask us, what direction do you want this pattern to go in? And so this is where we can use some of the axes that we've created before. So I'm just going to open up the design tree in my display area. I'm going to hover over each one of these 3 axes until I find the one that fits best. It's going to be axis number 1 because it's going right and left, and we want to go right and left. So just click axis 1, and a couple of things to watch out for. There's this information box here which doesn't really want to move around right now, so I'll just leave it where it is, but it gives you some information about the direction. And there's also spacing and instances as well in here. So our linear pattern has shown up with a couple of parameters preset into it, and we can adjust that. So that might not be the parameters that we want to apply for this pattern. The axis is set correctly because we defined that ourselves. The next box that's down here is the spacing. Now that's the spacing between each instance of your pattern. So we're going to make multiples of this cut, and this is SolidWorks asking us, how far apart do you want each instance of the pattern to be? Now, that's a tricky thing to figure out. Best way to figure it out is to just kind of play with it. We're going to set it to something we think is right, and then we're going to see what happens, and then we can always dive back into this feature, and we can always adjust it later on. Unlike other 3D programs that you might be using, adjusting stuff like this is super easy. So for the first tutorial that we've got here, let's just get in there, and I'm just going to set this to 1/4 inch, and we'll cross our fingers that that works. Now, this box down here tells us the number of instances that we'd like to create. 7 sounds like an okay number. I'll just shorten that a little bit, change it to 5, because I'm not quite sure what it's going to do. So you can see right away that this pattern, this linear pattern creation tool, it's a little up in the air until you see what it's going to do. Okay, so the next thing we have to do is now we have to tell SolidWorks which feature of all the features that we've added so far do we want to pattern. So there is this thing here, this little drop down for features to pattern, and when you open it up like that, the box turns blue, meaning it's asking you to enter in information. And we've got right up here is the feature that we created earlier. This was the cut extrude. This is the hole we cut through our thing. So we just make sure that's highlighted by clicking in the box once, and we'll just hit the cut extrude once with 1 click, and there we go. So now, if for some reason we wanted to remove this cut extrude from the features to pattern, we can just do a right click inside of this box, and there's a couple of options. Clear selections will remove all of the, you could have multiples in here, and if you did, you could remove all of the multiples of the features, or you could just delete this single one. But for now, we're going to add that one in there. And now let's take a look at what SolidWorks has done. So you could see that it has made the 5 patterns, the 5 instances for our pattern, but you can also see that my guess of 0.25 inches of spacing was definitely not enough. So I'm just going to go ahead and up that spacing to start by clicking on this little up arrow. And I'm going to pick a spacing that I want, which is going to be probably about like that. Okay. And so that's the spacing I like in between each one. And now I want to add a couple more instances to fill out the rest of this blank space. So I'll just go here to my instances box, and I'll just add a couple more. That's too many. That's just enough. I'll up my spacing a little to fill out some of the blank space. And now these arrows here are going to up the spacing in a certain set amount. And I want to have a little bit more control than that. So I'm just going to go 0.8 and type it in. There we go. Okay, good. All right, so now I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the spacing. I'm happy with the number of instances, and I can just go ahead and I can hit the green checkbox right up here to confirm that. And voila, there you go. You can see that SolidWorks has now created a linear pattern of all of those cuts across the board. Okay, so that's pretty great. So let's do something else next. Let's open up another linear pattern. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a linear pattern that goes up, and a pattern is going to be of this pattern. So we're going to take this pattern and pattern it, okay? So hit linear pattern. Go ahead, now you're going to have to define the direction you want to go. So you want to go up. So find the axis that's going up and down. It's axis number 2. And there you go. SolidWorks is way ahead of us on this one. Because we've already done one linear pattern, and because our old linear pattern was the last thing we did, it sees right away what we want to do. So it's already gone ahead and done what it thinks. Now we have a little bit of adjustment to do because these pieces are just a little bit close together. So let's add actually just one more instance. There we go. And then let's drop the spacing down and see. Okay, that's pretty close. Those instances are pretty close together. Maybe if I drop the number down but up the spacing, we can fill out our plane, or we can fill this thing out a little bit better. Anyway. Okay, so now you're starting to see, guys, how this can be a little tricky. You got to kind of get it. Now, out of nowhere, I think I just nailed it. We got 1 inch of spacing and a repetition of 8. Everything looks good. SolidWorks has automatically entered the previous pattern that we created into the features to pattern. And so we're good to go. I'm going to hit the green checkbox, and it's going to make a pattern of the pattern. And there you go. So we are all set. So now with the stock tutorials that SolidWorks provides, they would just make super boring little squares and make kind of like a checkerboard thing here. I've used the slot at an angle because it looks a little bit cooler. Hopefully you think so. But this is the drill, right? This is how to do linear patterns in SolidWorks, okay? Now that we've done that, we can just as easily say we wanted to add a fillet to this entire face. Well, if you remember from our talk on fillets before, you just click on the face that you want to add a fillet to, and it will add a fillet to every single edge that this face touches. So I'll just click that. It's going to think about it for a second because this is a serious amount of fillets to add. But there you go. I'll go ahead and green checkbox just like that. There we go. We can even throw on a couple more fillets too, right up here on these edges. There we go. Now the fillet that I'm going to add to these edges here, I'm going to do here in this separate operation because that'll give me the control I need to control. To allow it to be a different radius than the interior. So now what just happened there was I tried to increase the size of the fillet to a radius that would cause the round to plow into one of these features here. And so SolidWorks just shut me down right away. See, if I change this right now, I've got it at 0.2 inches for the fillet. If I try to up it to 0.3, it just shuts down and it just the fillet option disappears. So if that ever happens on you, just back off. Just play around. Everything's about playing around with SolidWorks because we can always go back and redo this stuff. So 0.2 is working. It's giving us what we want. Green checkbox, and we are done. Just like that. So that's looking pretty good, guys. How to do linear patterns in SolidWorks. Just to close it down, I'll take the display here and change the display from shaded with edges to shaded alone so we can get a kind of more realistic view of it. And there you go. There is your brand new pattern and a plate. Voila. Okay, thanks for watching. And in the next one, we're going to do a circular pattern. Okay.